Hello, everyone. I'm Leonel August Rodriguez, the VP of Business Development for Access Medical Labs. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on another Access Live, where we bring you insight from leading medical experts. We do ask that all questions are submitted via the Q&A, as they will be answered at the end of our lecture. Today, I am honored to present to you an individual who has over 12 years of experience in anti-aging and longevity medicine. She is board certified in anti-aging by the American Academy of Anti-Aging and Regenerative Medicine, and in functional medicine by the Institute of Functional Medicine. She is the founder and medical director of the very successful Angel Longevity Medical Center in Los Angeles, California. Without further ado, Dr. Anju Mathur.
Thank you, Leo, for that gracious introduction.
It's my pleasure.
I'm honored and privileged to be here today to discuss autoimmunity, an epidemic of the 21st century. Next slide. The three objectives that I have for today's talk would be: one, to describe the autoimmune epidemic, then to discuss the mechanism of immune dysregulation in autoimmune disease as we understand it today. And then finally, to discuss the interplay of genetics and the environmental factors in the development of autoimmune disease. Next. So then we will take a deep dive into how and where do we start looking for the root causes of autoimmunity. Next. But first, let's take a look at the history. Paul Ehrlich, a German scientist, coined the term horror autotoxicus for autoimmunity. In the 40s, the first autoantibodies, the ANA and the RF, were discovered. And then by the 1950s, because of the clinical breakthroughs, that led to the diagnosis of chronic Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which finally led to the acceptance of the existence of autoimmune disease. Next. Now, fast forward to today, it's estimated that 50 million Americans have an autoimmune disease. In other words, 1 in every 5 Americans has either one or multiple autoimmune disorders. 75% of these patients are actually women. It is estimated that the cost of treating autoimmune disease in the US is greater than $100 billion annually. Next. And 70 billion is attributed to only top 7 autoimmune diseases. So most likely, this is an underestimation. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a very interesting study published recently in the Journal of Rheumatology in 2020. And the researchers found that the prevalence of anti-nuclear antibodies, the most common biomarker of autoimmunity, was significantly increasing in the United States, as you can see in this chart. But the most worrisome part was that the young people, ages between 12 and 19, had the largest ANA increase, going from 2 to 3-fold over the 3 time frames that were chosen. And I see this in my practice on a daily basis when younger and younger people are coming in with autoimmune conditions. In fact, my own son was diagnosed with Hashimoto's when he was only 13. And the youngest I've treated in my practice was an 80-year-old girl with rheumatoid arthritis. So later on, I will share one of those case studies with you today. Next. So today we have over 100 of autoimmune diseases that have been discovered and described. Next. So let's take fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia affects like 4 million Americans, or 2% of the population. Now, is it an autoimmune disease? Let's check it out on the next slide. So this review was published in 2013, and that suggests that everything is autoimmune unless proven otherwise. So why is this? Because today we have a lot more autoantibodies that have been discovered than there are actually autoimmune diseases. And also because of the ubiquitous nature of the innate and the adaptive immune system, there are many more diseases that have been found to have inflammatory or an autoimmune response. Next. So this study suggests that fibromyalgia is a small fiber neuropathy and neuroinflammation. Moreover, the genes that are involved in immunological pathways in fibromyalgia is connected to interleukin 17 and to type 1 interferon signatures were modulated. So that suggests that there is an autoimmunity that may play a role in fibromyalgia. And the type 1 interferon signatures are also seen in other autoimmune diseases like lupus. Next. So the current paradigm of autoimmunity is that there is a genetic predisposition which interacts with environmental factors to cause immune dysregulation. That this is straight from the Johns Hopkins website. So let's dive deeper into each of these factors. So is there an autoimmune disease gene? In terms of genetic predisposition, there is no one gene that causes a particular autoimmune disease. This is a polygenic gene where multiple genes are involved in varying degrees. And the main one is HLA, which is human leukocyte antigen. And we know that in ankylosing spondylitis, it is HLA-B27, and in diabetes type 1, it is DQ8 allele that increases the risk of developing type 1 diabetes. So here I just wanted to review the basic concepts of immune system. We know there is an innate and an adaptive immune system, and they both defend us from not only external but also internal invaders. And so the innate is what we are born with, and these are simply our physical barriers of skin, the mucous membrane, and the mucus that's over these mucous membranes. And that includes our gut lining, which is over 4,000 square feet of surface area. So when these barriers are breached, there is an activation of the natural killer cells, macrophages and dendritic cells. And these pathogens are then engulfed and destroyed, and the antigens are carried by the antigen-presenting cells, as we know, to the naive T lymphocytes, which then activate our adaptive immune system. Next. So this is an adaptive immune system. So the CD4 receptors on the T helper cells interact with the MHC class II molecules in the antigen-presenting cells to activate the T helper cells. And these are activated depending on what are the chemokines and the cytokines that are present. So they can go down the various pathways like Th1, Th2, Th17, or Treg cells. Th1 is thought to be associated with cell-mediated immunity, inflammation, intracellular infections, and autoimmunity. And the Th2 activates the B lymphocytes, which produce antibodies and are responsible for allergy and asthma conditions. So the recent research has shown that transforming growth factor beta-1 is a precursor to activating both the Th17 as well as the T regulatory cells. So, but the presence of IL-6, interleukin 6, leads to the activation of Th17 pathway, and that causes autoimmunity inflammation. But the presence of IL-12 leads to the activation of Treg cells, the good guys. And that leads to the immune tolerance and homeostasis. In short, the Treg cells, the good guys, cause immune tolerance and homeostasis and promote the tissue repair after the damage has occurred. And the T17 cells, the bad guys, cause autoimmunity and inflammation. So the balance of the two, which is the seesaw of the Th17 and the Treg cells, determines whether a person develops an autoimmune condition. So this is the basic pathogenic mechanism underlying an autoimmune condition. So in this slide, I want to show you one key point, which is, does the gut microbiota influence the Th17 and the Treg balance? And the answer is yes. So there are segmented filamentous bacteria, the SFBs, in the small intestine that provide antigens to induce the Th17 cell differentiation. And this happens during the autoimmune condition. Whereas the good bacteria, like Bacteroides fragilis and Clostridia species, they help to tip the balance in favor of inducing Treg cells in the gut with the release of the polysaccharide A, and then also downregulates the Th17 inflammation pathway. Also, the good gut microbiota also produces a short-chain fatty acids, and they can induce the Treg cells activation, and that favors the tolerance and downregulates the inflammation. So these findings could help us implement dietary interventions with higher amounts of good fats in the diet, could promote the downregulation of Th17 and thus reduce inflammation in the gut. Next. So what are the environmental triggers? This is my favorite slide, I must say. And this is the basic matrix that I go to when I'm seeing an autoimmune patient. I go to this matrix immediately. And in fact, I use it to explain it to the patients, the root causes of autoimmunity. So in practicing functional medicine for over 10 years, I have seen that no matter what autoimmune condition a patient has, we can place the root causes of environmental triggers into 4 broad categories. And these are dietary, which includes the food that you're eating, as well as the food sensitivities, the food allergies, pathogens, infections, whether it's a virus or bacteria or fungus, toxic elements, plastic, non-plastic, metals, stress, physical or psychological. And we're going to come back to this slide later on. So this is a SAD diet, and we are very familiar, and perhaps, in my mind, one of the most important drivers of autoimmunity. All disease begins in the gut, as Hippocrates said some 2,500 years ago, and so did my mom. I grew up with that concept. All disease starts in the gut. So let's talk about the gut. The human gut microbiota is a dynamic ecosystem consisting of over 100 trillion microbial cells. So the recent study published in 2022 shows that these gut microbes, or the secreted metabolites, directly interact with GALT, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And this interaction is mediated through TLRs, the toll-like receptors, leading to the induction of the immune cell differentiation, and that sets the balance between the T helper and the Treg cells and prevents the gut leakage. Another mechanism of how the gut microbes affect our immune system is through modulating host genes through the microRNA. So the healthy microbiome has a balanced microbial composition, promoting potentially the anti-inflammatory microbes. And during the microbial dysbiosis, the gut barrier is leaky, which results in diffusion of microbial metabolites such as LPS into the circulation, causing systemic inflammation and autoimmunity. The microbial dysbiosis is strongly linked to local inflammation and autoimmune diseases. So changing the microbiome structure would impair the important function like gut permeability, also reduces the ability of the anti-inflammatory microbial metabolites to actually downregulate the inflammation, and the loss of immune homeostasis leading to allergy and autoimmune reactions. So dysbiosis can be caused by many things, like we mentioned earlier: poor diet, high sugar, low fiber, stress, drugs, infections, viruses, chemicals, etc. This study on zonulin is published by Dr. Alessio Pisano. He discovered this protein called zonulin, very important discovery. Zonulin is a protein that modulates the tight junctions in the intestinal epithelial lining, and that monitors intestinal permeability. So the factors that would upregulate zonulin would increase the intestinal permeability, and the food peptides like including gluten, gliadin, chemicals, pesticides, even virus particles, or other immune modulating peptides will pass through the leaky gut, and they would activate our adaptive immune system, causing the dysregulation between the Th17 and the Treg cell balance, thus causing autoimmunity. So there is now labs available that would measure your intestinal permeability. I'm not covering the labs in this webinar, subject for another time. But let's look at the next mechanism of autoimmunity, which is the molecular mimicry. So molecular mimicry is a similarity between the cell and the foreign antigen, which then activates the auto-reactive T or B cells in a genetically susceptible individual. And that would lead to the inflammatory cascade, causing autoimmunity and tissue damage. So the food antigen, the foreign antigen can come from food peptides, viral particles, or even chemicals or toxins. Gluten is one of the most offending food antigen that can not only cause celiac disease, but also extra-intestinal manifestations, especially brain manifestations. So that is the gut-brain axis in action, which can lead to depression, neuropathy, fibromyalgia, and that's like leaky gut leading to leaky brain. The 2013 published study showed not only that gluten sensitivity leading to autoimmune, but there is actually a cross-reactivity with other food antigens, like dairy, for example, in a cow's milk, or milk chocolate, casein, whey protein. And not only that, gluten also had a significant binding with the human organs like neural tissue, pancreatic, renal, or liver tissue. So causing extra-intestinal manifestation of gluten sensitivity causing autoimmunity. So this diagram shows similar epitopes of gliadin and the brain cell binding to the same antibody that causes autoimmunity. So I very commonly, I take my autoimmune patients off the gluten and dairy right off the bat, even before I get the food sensitivity results back. So food is medicine, it is information. So food talks to our genes and ultimately regulates the gene expression or gene silencing. So food is very, very important. Moving on to the next pillar of root causes of autoimmunity. Viral infections are considered a major environmental trigger causing autoimmune disease. So this particular study shows that the autoimmune disease for which there is a viral cause that has been proposed. So if you look at it, the EBV is like an underlying ubiquitous virus that's found in most adults and is implicated not only in multiple sclerosis, but rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and even diabetes type 1. So viruses can cause autoimmunity by molecular mimicry and other mechanisms as well. So this is a retrospective study, and I wanted to throw in this slide because it's more current. We are just getting over the pandemic, and this is a retrospective study done on over 3 million participants with almost 900,000 cases of COVID. And this was just recently published in Lancet in January. So they found that the COVID-19 is associated with a different degree of risk for various autoimmune diseases, as they're listed here. So you can see ankylosing spondylitis, systemic sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, you name it. So this gives us a pause. When we see patients struggling with various seemingly unrelated weird symptoms long after COVID infection is gone. So we always look for an autoimmune component once I see that there is a COVID infection history. Moving on to the third pillar of the matrix, which is I wanted to just show you this study. There's many chemicals that are involved. I just wanted to show bisphenol A and the potential role of bisphenol in causing autoimmunity. And this is a direct activation of Th17 pro-inflammatory pathway. So BPA is a xenoestrogen, as we know, and is used globally in the manufacture of daily use products like plastic storage containers, water, infant bottles, food and drink packaging. So this slide shows the study on the low dose of glyphosate causes gut dysbiosis, leading to increased intestinal permeability and thus autoimmunity. So increasing evidence has linked environmental exposures, even including silica, mercury, pristane, pesticides, smoking, to autoimmunity. So I usually do the environmental toxic panel depending on the history of toxic exposure of the patient. So my working model, the model that I go back to, the matrix that I go back to is this one, which is basically the 4 different parts of how I work up an autoimmune patient. So all the laboratory that we do the testing would be done under those different categories that I just showed you. I know there's a lot of laboratories that could be done, and this is just a reminder to just make it easier to navigate trying to find the root cause of an autoimmune patient. So the classical paradigm of inflammatory pathogenesis involves definitely a specific genetic makeup with an exposure to environmental triggers. Now that has been challenged recently by the addition of a 3rd element, which is the loss of intestinal barrier or the functional leaky gut. And this is the work I was referring earlier to Dr. Lisa Fasano at Massachusetts General. And this new paradigm subverts traditional theories underlying the development of these diseases and suggests that these processes can be arrested if the interplay between the genes and the environmental triggers is prevented by reestablishing the zonulin-dependent intestinal barrier function. So this gives us a way to treat our patients, look for the leaky gut, and to treat the leaky gut. So this is our case study that I want to share with you today. He is a 19-year-old Chinese male college student, and he had the ulcerative colitis for almost 3 years. And when he came to see me, he had a terrible bout of feeling terrible gut symptoms. Couldn't eat without having pain. And he, in fact, a week or 2 weeks prior for him, before the presentation, he was seen by his GI doctor, and a colonoscopy was done, and it was seen that the lesions had spread all over the gut. So he was, in fact, prescribed 2 new drugs besides the mesalamine that he was on for 2 years, and that was mercaptopurine and prednisone. So when I saw him, he's a college student, so he was partying, using marijuana, alcohol, and just eating terrible. And so when I asked him, so what would your goal be? He said he wanted to gain 10 pounds, he wanted to have more energy and have no blood in his stool. So we did some of his labs. I actually had a picture of his colonoscopy, which I couldn't upload today, but it was very lesions like all over his gut. And this was his food sensitivity that we did. I have one of this is dairy. He had some sensitivity to dairy. And then this is his gut test. We did his comprehensive stool digestive analysis, the GI effects from Genova. And as you see, he had a severe dysbiosis. The way I explained to the patients is if 10 was the worst, you are at 10. So this, as you can see very clearly, he had a severe dysbiosis. And then, as I'm going to show you in the next slide, he had also intestinal permeability. Now, this is LPS, as you can see, lipopolysaccharides and IgGs that were elevated, even though it's equivocal. But so empirically, we treated him with basically knowing that he had severe dysbiosis. So first off, when I started treating him, we advised him to avoid alcohol and stop, smoking marijuana, and also stop eating fast foods. But he was a college student, so just eating whatever he could eat. And also right off the bat, I usually take people off of gluten and dairy, as I explained earlier. So I did that with the patient as well. Next slide. So this was very simple case. So I just started him on high dose probiotics, fish oil, vitamin D, and just digestive enzymes and hemp oil complex. And once we had the food allergy results came back, we also took him off of other foods that he was sensitive to, which had a lot of other stuff that he was allergic to: oats, gluten, wheat, white rice, avocado, pineapple, baker's yeast, and all this. And I want to share this video. So this is at the end of it, after he was treated, and what he has to say about his treatment.
And I was like, okay, so the problem's not getting fixed. Like, I just had a name of a disease that I had, but I didn't understand it at all. The meds suppressed my symptoms, but I wasn't actually healing or actually getting any better. I was just kind of getting worse. So when I started seeing Dr. Mathur, the kind of steps that she took were at first already dramatically different. She kind of told me what I needed to do to fix myself, which sounds so simple. Oh, you need to eat right, or you need to stop drinking alcohol. And what she said she wanted to do was find exactly what was wrong, or the imbalances in my body, what was off my body. And she did. She found all those things, and then she started giving me supplements to take to boost certain areas, to level things out. And she told me that once all things are leveled, your body will naturally heal itself. And I really believed that, and it worked. Now I know what I need to do to be healthy and live a normal life in the future. And that's not something I had before, so thank you.
Wow, what an amazing story, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you. Yeah, it was my pleasure to treat him. It was fun.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing the case study with us, and thank you for such an amazing presentation. I do have a few questions that have been asked in the Q&A. So the first question is, are there any supplements you would recommend to assist in the production of Th17 cells?
Right, so we want to downregulate the activation of T17 cells because that causes inflammation. So even just, handling, like giving high quality probiotics and even prebiotics. So if you have a diversity of different microbial agents or cells in the gut microbiota, you have better chances of having T regulatory cells upregulated. So I prefer that I get patients prebiotics that would help increase the diversity. The other thing that I recommend for patients who have any kind of gut issues is a product called SBI, which is serum bovine immunoglobulins. And these immunoglobulins bind to the toxin and they remove it in the stools. So this is a very popular product. People love it when I give it to them.
Excellent. Now, the probiotics, I know those are over the counter. The SBIs, are those over the counter as well?
I'm not sure. It is a product which is available through Automolecular. So I use it in my practice a lot. I'm sure it's available online.
Excellent. So we have a shout out. I'm sorry.
Yeah. The prebiotic is the one that's from Angel Pure MD, and it is available online.
Excellent. Okay, so shout out to Ortho for the SBI and Angel for the probiotics. Next question I have. For the parents, what measures can we take to prevent autoimmune disorders in our children?
Yeah, very, very important question. I think if we get together as families and we involve the kids, I mean, it's very easy to go out and go through a drive-through and go to a fast food and pick up a meal, right? Like we showed the SAD diet. But in order to change the whole paradigm, the whole idea that it's not just about picking up a meal, we can actually get our children involved in making menus, even meal prep, or even planning for the meals, and get them involved, and then create the food together as a family. I think that will change a lot. And even just removing the gluten 100% is gluten is like, I feel like, okay, that's the biggest enemy we have right in front of us. So if you remove the gluten and dairy, not only because of the molecular mimicry, but also there is a GMO part of it, which makes it even worse as a toxic agent and causing autoimmunity. So removing the gluten, removing the dairy from the food, and getting children involved, eating more vegetables, more fruits, then we can do something about this autoimmune epidemic.
I love it. I actually have my 5-year-old, whenever we go out shopping, if something is red, she always asks, does it have red dye? I can't have red dye. So it's hilarious.
Right, exactly. Education is another part of it. Yes.
Absolutely. So I guess, any ingredients, since we're on red dye and gluten, any ingredients in foods you would suggest patients with autoimmune disorders to stay away from?
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the things, the biggest 7 problems, there are 7 ingredients. Actually, there was a study that was done in Israel and from Germany. This study was done. There were 7 top ingredients in the food that would be linked to an autoimmune disorder. Gluten, obviously, I mentioned, it was number 1. Sugars, all artificial sugar, processed sugars, salt. Emulsifiers are used a lot in the baking industry, confectionery, dairy, fats. And then you have organic solvents, a lot of preservatives, flavorings, food enhancers. And I think anything that's not organic, which has been exposed to the pesticides, insecticides, I mean, glyphosate, there's so much toxins, and even plastic covers, the plastic food wrappings, there's so much food wrappings. And that leaches into the food and causes problems with our immune system.
Wow. So we really have to be extra cautious as to what we are consuming. It seems like it's readily available and it's around us everywhere. Okay. So I'm going to mispronounce this word. What was the role of mercaptopurine?
Oh yeah, mercaptopurine. Yeah, mercaptopurine. Yeah, this is actually a chemotherapeutic drug. What I mentioned in the case study was that the patient's GI doctor, the gastroenterologist who did the colonoscopy and saw that the lesions had spread all over his gut, he prescribed mercaptopurine for him to control those symptoms. And that was only 2 days prior to him showing up in my office. So obviously I took him off the drug immediately. I mean, I told him, okay, it's just 2 days you've been on it, so it's totally fine. And the prednisone, those 2 drugs he was on, so he's obviously off those 2 drugs completely. And in young children, it's actually young adults, I should say, and it is being used now for inflammatory bowel disease. This drug is being used for Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, but it can cause lymphomas, cancer in children, in young adults. So I educate my patients, tell them what the side effects are, and obviously they don't want to take those drugs, and this is why they come to me, and we just naturally take them off the drug. And as you saw, yeah, he's doing great.
Very interesting. Awesome. And my last question, I promise.
Okay.
So, aside from lab diagnostics, such as the blood tests or the stool tests, any other diagnostic tools that you utilize to diagnose autoimmune disorder?
Well, Leo, remember I said the laboratory workup wasn't a part of this webinar. I wanted to cover this, so much to cover on this. But yeah, I mean, in short, basically I do, with Access Lab, we do the autoimmune analyzer, right? That's number one. I want to see, I actually do this very frequently because I want to see, a lot of times some of these things are not picked up by their primary care physicians. And so I want to just see if there's any ANA, like I showed you, the ANA, the prevalence is rising in our society rapidly. So I want to just see if there is any ANA positive or not. And then there is all these other autoantibodies, anti-centromere, anti-chromatin. I mean, there's so many, anti-RMP, SSA. All these antibodies are part of the autoimmune analyzer. And then sometimes, depending on the patient, I would also order, of course, the intestinal permeability is done. I use Cyrex for that, to see if there's a gut permeability and there's a leaky gut. And then for some patients that are more complex and I want to know, okay, what's happening with the Th1, Th2, or Th17, I do what's called lymphocyte map with Cyrex. So those are the labs that I usually do.
Excellent. I asked that question last because I wanted to hint as to a part two. So I guess part two may just be the actual lab, the diagnostic tools, and how we can fix the patients using those tools. Dr. Mathur, on behalf of Access Medical Labs, I wanted to thank you for an incredibly informative lecture on essentially the new age causes of autoimmune disorders. If you could kindly, tell our audience how they can reach you for any sort of, peer consultations, any physicians, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. I think I was on my first slide. That's the that's the Anju Longevity Medical Center, and you can actually email me if you like. It's Dr. Mathur at angelmedcenter.com. Yeah, I can show the slide.
There it is. We'll put it on the screen.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And there is a phone number there, 213-463-5415. So you can easily reach me there, and I look forward to hearing from some of you.
Beautiful. Dr. Mathur, thank you again. Truly appreciated. To our audience, thank you again for tuning into another Access Live, where we bring you insight from leading medical experts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay healthy. Till next time. Bye-bye, everyone.